This is the 5th annual presentation on Eastern European Jewry before the Holocaust. The mission of this series, and of my stepfather, Michael Kesler, who conceived it, with the help of the East Brunswick Public Library, is to try to save from the ashes whatever is possible to transmit from the life of Jews before the Holocaust.
For Jews, music is the accompanying rhythm of each day's hours. For centuries, the Jews of Eastern Europe, particularly those of Bessarabia, of Poland, of Lithuania, were at the very center of Jewish scholarship and culture. Jewish religiosity, scholarship, theater, and certainly music thrived in that time and place. Jews soaked up the melodies that floated through the air and the forms of Middle European music and made them their own. From the high classics to folk tunes and wordless nigunim melodies, the Jews of Bessarabia infused this music with the themes and the emotions of millennia of Jewish hopes and dreams.
As a historian of Eastern Europe, I think I'm faced with this very paradox because we do have a very painful memory of these areas. Pogroms, the Holocaust, the infamous blood libel accusations, these are all part of the history of Jewish life there. And yet there had to be a reason why 3/4 of the world's Jewish population ended up there. And part of the answer is for several centuries since the Middle Ages, Jewish life in Eastern Europe was relatively secure and prosperous. A lot of this had to do with the economic contributions that Jews had and that they offered to the nobility, who in return would protect the Jews. And at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, when we see a lot of these really terrible outbreaks of violence, including massive waves of pogroms, it has a lot to do with the decline of the nobility, the emancipation of the peasantry, which is now suddenly competing with Jews, as well as the rise of new forms of anti-Semitism, which are abetted by things like the press, all kinds of new ways of spreading hatred as much as spreading knowledge. This is all part of modernity.
Our program highlights the music of the Jewish people that was composed, sung, and played before the Holocaust in Tsarist Russia and Bessarabia. Our selections will tell Jewish life cycle stories from infancy to the time of service in the army during World War I. Our first offering is the lilting lullaby, Rosen kes mit Mandlin, Raisins with Almonds. Mark Warszawski wrote this poignant poem as a metaphor of the destiny of a Jewish child.
In dem Beis Hamikdash, in a finca Heide, sitzt die Almona Bastion allein. Ihr ben Jochidel Idela, liegt sie Geseder und singt ihm zum Schlafen a Liedele.
The Cheder represented the first serious phase of educating a Jewish child, and the learning continued as boys became a bar mitzvah and beyond. No wonder the Jews became known as the people of the book throughout their long history. This learning most frequently involved a yeshiva, a word derived from the verb to sit. Attending a yeshiva often required much perseverance and often some suffering for the student. And most of the time, the houses of worship provided the necessary accommodations. Chaim Nachman Bialik, the Jewish Hebrew poet laureate, expressed this beautifully in his famous poem, Should You Wish to Know the Source, which Dr. Barbara Reed, Professor Emerita from Rutgers University, will now read for us.
Should you wish to know the source from which your brothers drew their strength of soul, their comfort, courage, patience, trust, and iron might to bear their hardships, and suffer without end or measure. If you, my brother, know not, then enter now the house of God, the house of study, old and gray, throughout the scorching summer days, throughout the gloomy winter nights, at morning, midday, or at eve. And there you may still behold a group of Jews from the exile who bore the yoke of its burden and who forgot their toil through a worn-out page of the Talmud. And then your heart shall guess the truth, that you have touched the sacred ground of a great people's house of life, and that your eyes do gaze upon the treasure of a nation's soul.
The learning continued, usually in houses of worship, as reflected in our next selection, Michael Mashmalon, which Michael will present. Soslavsky depicts in song a poignant portrait of a yeshiva student, very worried about the lack of proper clothing for the coming winter. The student becomes depressed by his state and finally renders a heartbreaking cry. What is the meaning of my life?
Seine Truppen und die Schäume kacken sie wie Liebesbrand. Und die Stimmen des Tsaristen und es geht in das Blut.
While all of this learning is taking place, a young man's hormones tell a somewhat different story. Mordechai Gebertig, the Jewish troubadour from Krakow, Poland, tells us of a sweet encounter between Rezele and a young man who was about to become a bar mitzvah. You can follow the translation and transliteration in your handouts. David Schlossberg, our pianist, will represent the bar mitzvah boy, and Debbie Gerber will represent Rezele.
Steht sich dort in Gessele, still vertracht an Eisele. Drinnen auf dem Beutenstiel wohnt mein Teier Reisele. Jeden Abend bei den Eiseln dreh ich sich herum, gib a Pfeif und ruf euch Reisel, komm, komm, komm. Öffnet sich ein Fenster auf, wacht aufs alte Heisele, und bald klingt in stillen Gessel, als ist kalt, so redet Reisele.
Noch ein Weile wart mein Lieber, bald will ich dein Hei, geh sich nur ab Humor über 1, 2, 3.
Geh ich mir a freilicher, sing und knack mir nisselig, her ich auf die Trepplich springen, ihre drobne Fieselig. Scheun herab von letzten Treppel, ich nehm sie lieber ich gib ihr still a Kusch in Keppel. Komm, komm, komm.
Ich liebe dich, mein Liebenker, und do, schrie ich als schön Zwillensechel mit am Morgen Davido. Wenn gefällens wird in Kleid, so sagen sollst du sein, schrott geschrickt dein liebe Reise, 1, 2, 3.
Geh ich mir a freiliger, sing und knack mir nisselig, her ich auf de Trepp dich laufen, ihre drobne Fieselig. Wieder steht vertracht das Eisel, das Kessel wieder stumm. Komm zu mir en Chor.
last piece of this part of the program, written by Yitzhak von Berdichev, a prolific rabbinic composer, proclaims that God is everywhere. Do addresses the Almighty in a familiar voice, recounting joyfully the omnipotence and the universality of the Almighty. Michael and Stephen will present it as a duet, with May Kesler, a professional dancer, accompanying the exciting music on the dance floor.
Singen,